On This Week in Enterprise Tech, it's all about synergy, paradigm shifts, buzzwords, memes. Also, Comcast doesn't think that you need to go any faster. Twice on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Enterprise Tech is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twice. This Week in Enterprise Tech, Episode 47, recorded June 7, 2013. The Temporary Tribe. This episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by RingCentral. We do everything in the cloud. That's why I love my cloud-based phone system by RingCentral. Zero startup costs, and RingCentral is $20 per month per user. Try it now with a 30-day risk-free trial and buy one desk phone and get a second phone free up to 20 phones. Call 800-543-9980 or visit ringcentral.com and use our promo code TWIT. And by TechServe. TechServe assists U.S. businesses of all sizes with their technology needs, including Apple, Avid, Adobe, and HP solutions. Visit techserve.com/twiet and receive a complimentary iPad deployment assessment. And by MailRoute. MailRoute is email filtering in the cloud for companies of any size. If your service is disappearing, talk to MailRoute for price matching on Postini or Forefront contracts. Visit mailroute.net/signup.html and use the promo code Enterprise6. Welcome to Twice, This Week in Enterprise Tech. It's the show dedicated to the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how the world is connected. I'm your host, Father Robert Ballecer, the digital Jesuit, your guide to all things in the enterprise. But I'm not alone. As always, I'm joined by an all-star cast, starting with my favorite person on the East Coast, Mr. Curtis Franklin. Curtis, you outran a storm to be with us. Tell us where you're coming from and what you're doing now.
I did indeed. I was over in the Big Easy, New Orleans, Louisiana, all week and managed to come back. And fortunately, the tropical depression, I guess it was a tropical storm that moved through, was kind enough to do it quickly enough so that we didn't have much trouble driving back in. Made it here about 20 minutes before we started Twice, and can't think of any place I'd rather be.
And we thank the storm for washing your pipe because you look really, really good. You've got some clean bits coming back into the brick house. Now, speaking of the brick house, we've got two guests joining us in-house to speak with us about a very special topic. We're going to introduce them later on, but I want to hold them. Well, maybe Jason could give a two-shot just to tease it. That's right. Do that and do that. Oh, yeah, see. But we're not going to pretend like they're not there. They're hiding off in the distance while we cover the Enterprise Byte. Let's get into it. Curtis, first of all, we've got, well, I'm just going to call it a funny. We've got a Comcast exec who is essentially echoing what his peers have said, and that is that that's right, you, the listening, the watching public, you don't want faster internet. Yeah, you may think that you do, but you actually don't. Now, let's actually get back down to reality here. We've got Executive Vice President David L. Cohen insisting that users don't want higher speed internet access because, and I quote, most websites can't deliver content as fast as current networks move, and most U.S. homes have routers that can't support the speed already available to the home. Now, this comes after representatives from both Time Warner Cable and the National Cable and Telecom Association have both said essentially the same thing, which is the Google experiment is just a publicity stunt. It doesn't really do anything. You're giving them a gigabit pipeline, but they can't do anything with that speed. Curtis, before my cynicism creeps in, what's your take on this?
Well, there are a number of layers. First, there's an element of truth to what he has to say. For most people, under most circumstances, the raw bandwidth of their internet connection is not the limiting factor on the speed of what they're seeing. There are a lot of components to any internet transaction. Now, where I have a problem is him basically defining this as a chicken and the egg sort of problem and saying that Comcast and its customers have no desire to be either the chicken or the egg. Basically, they'll wait until they are the bottleneck before they can think about moving. And I think that's the wrong approach. I suspect, to be brutally honest, that there are some more, well, much more self-serving interest behind the reason for him telling us that we're the ones who don't want the faster speeds.
We'll get right into those self-serving reasons, but the thing about this story that really, really strikes me is if Google had rolled out to one city, if they had just done Kansas City, or just 2 cities, or 3 cities, and then called it a day, I think the telcos would be justified in saying, look, they're just doing this to be a thorn in our side. They're doing this as a publicity stunt, but they have no intention of rolling out to the entire nation because they know that you can't make money deploying fiber. But because Google continues to do that, and not only because they continue to roll out Google Fiber Cities, but because they're changing the business plan into buying existing fiber plants to deliver the same sort of service that they're delivering to the cities that they actually rolled out the fiber into. And because we've also had Google executives who say, we don't see this as a loss leader, we see Google Fiber as a future money maker, it strikes me as just strange and sort of bird with head in sand analogy of not wanting to see the truth, and that is a company is coming that's going to eat their lunch. Why do you think they're so hesitant to see that, no, people will use gigabit internet?
Well, I think the big reason that they have for saying that people won't use gigabit Ethernet is that today they can't deliver gigabit Ethernet, and therefore customers don't want what they can't deliver. It's very simple. It's sort of like the networks, the television networks, saying in the 1950s that television viewers really weren't interested in color broadcasts. Well, as it turns out, they were. They just needed to be provided with those great color programs. Here's what I think is going to happen. Google is going to show that the market really does exist. And as more and more customers are available for gigabit bandwidth programming, for really, it's the software we're talking about, more companies on the back end will be incented to deliver it. More hardware vendors will be incented to provide those cable modems or other demarc point devices that can really take advantage of the gigabit Ethernet. And you are going to start to see both the push and the pull on companies like Comcast and Time Warner and Cox and all the others who are busy trying to save that bandwidth for their commercial customers. You're absolutely right. This is one where these executives are on the wrong side of history. I suspect that they're hoping that that history will take long enough to get here that they'll be able to retire before the tidal wave washes over their company.
Our chat room is kind of going crazy with this story. We've got Scott Michaud who's saying, my guess, they're probably hoping that they can pass a law to prevent Google from doing it. Or they're saying, look, we're good enough. Why let another company dig up the streets and build infrastructure? We've got a couple of other guests who are saying, well, hey, I hate TV. Bring back black and white. Bring back radio. They're making fun of it, but I think they're catching on to this sense of well, I'm going to call it confident desperation. They're thinking that if they can say these things confidently enough, that we'll actually start believing it. That we'll actually start saying, hey, I guess we really don't need faster internet. Now, we talked about the possibility of looking at some of the other reasons why these cable companies and these telcos are saying these crazy, crazy things. And I think we need to go back to a story that we covered a few weeks back about business versus consumer class internet access. We covered a story from Ars Technica about the limits of Fios unlimited service. It was all about a California user who was called by his Verizon rep and asked what he was doing that used 50 to 77 terabytes of data a month. That's right, the user said, and I quote, I do some VPN stuff for people and web FTP, SFTP servers. A lot of my friends and family stream out from my servers, my huge media collection, and I also do some P2P and Usenet stuff. Now, he didn't want to disclose his name, but what he did explain was that previously he had purchased dual 150 megabit per second business class connections from Verizon, and that was costing him $340 a month for the dual 150s. Now, of course, dual 150s is still less than a gigabit of speed per month, and 340 is a whole lot more than 75 or 120, depending on what kind of service you want from Google. So it seems to me that it becomes even more clear why the telcos would make these statements. It's because they want to preserve the margins that they make on dedicated business class internet access. Now, I don't want to destroy that distinction. I think there's always going to be a place for a company to come in and say, we want to buy an SLA, a service level agreement that says you promise to provide us this amount of service at all times. But, and here's my question to you, Curtis, do you think there will become a time where we're going to have to do away with the distinction of speed, where we can no longer say, hey, if you want a gig, you have to buy the super expensive business class, but rather just say everyone gets access to the common fiber pool and you pay for a guarantee of service, not for actual maximum throughput?
I think you're absolutely right. I think we're reaching a point where the raw bandwidth is not going to be the differentiating factor. I think what companies are going to have to do is provide that service level agreement that you talked about. I'll give you an example of where that's happening now. My local cable provider has both residential and commercial accounts, and there's not a huge speed difference between them. The place where you do get speed differences are twofold. One, the terms of use. Their residential agreements say that you can't really provide a server on your account. In other words, you can't provide the sort of massive outbound traffic that the guy in your example was providing. With the commercial accounts, you can. The other one, and this is the more important one for a lot of us, is that if you're a commercial customer, they guarantee that if your internet goes out, if you place a call, they will have a service tech on site within an hour to start addressing the problem. For the residential customers, you give them a call, and they'll try to have someone on site within the calendar year. There's a huge difference there, and that's the sort of difference that business customers are willing to pay for. Raw bandwidth is becoming one of those things that people are taking for granted, and from where I'm sitting, that's exactly the way it should be.
Yeah, I like it. All right, let's call it close to that because, you know, we're not done with talking about bandwidth. We're not done with talking about the telcos, but I think that's all we can stomach for now. I do want to move on to the second Enterprise Bite, and that's all about showing me the memes. That's right. That's a Jerry Maguire reference for all of you who are too young, you whippersnappers who haven't seen that movie. If you haven't, you got to go watch it because, hey, it's an okay movie. Now, let's talk about this. We've got a story about how Google has started what they're calling the Engagement Project. Now, the idea is to share insight, perspective, and ideas on how brands can connect with consumers more deeply in the participation age. It's actually a very cool idea. Now, they've assembled a team of anthropologists, digital vanguards, content creators, essentially anyone with a stake in new media, social media creators, social media networks. If you do that, you got to be part of the Engagement Project. It's an interesting project because the stated goal is to figure out, essentially, why are certain things popular? Why do certain things take root in the mindset of the public? Why do some things go viral? Now, they have recognized that all of these things are starting to be used by the enterprise. They're starting to be used by business. This is the way to get the word out about your project, your service, your product, whatever it might be. So my question to you, Curtis, is, I think a lot of enterprises right now are trying to tackle this. They all desperately want the next viral hit. They want to create that video that goes around the world and gets 100 million views. They want that campaign that people talk about, not because of the product that it's advertising, but because of how quirky it was, or how brilliant it was, or how it brought attention to a product that otherwise we would have ignored. How focused do you think enterprises are on getting that next viral hit?
Oh, I think a lot of enterprises are exceptionally focused on this, and you can see it in some of the titles that they have. You're seeing all sorts of traditional manufacturing companies that now have chief content officers or chief digital officers, or even sometimes goofy names like chief engagement officers. All are focused most of the time, or at least part of the time, on this very issue. How do you get something to take on a life of its own? I think this is genius on the part of Google because, let's all admit it, in order for something to take on a life of its own, it's going to have to be available readily through one of the services that Google offers. So Google really is the linchpin in this, whether it's basic search or YouTube or whatever. And for them to try to crack the code on the meme is, I think, going to be one of the more fascinating projects we see this year.
I think one of the keys to this is one of the very first team members that they announced in their PR release, and that is they've assembled anthropologists and cultural anthropologists. So they've recognized off the bat that this just isn't about, well, what content is cool or why do we like this video or that story or this website. They're bringing in experts in looking at social trends in a society, in a culture. I think that's really what they're trying to figure out, which is how has culture changed, how has society changed in each successive generation, and how do you capture the mind share, that the X factor, what we used to call it, that the unknown that makes people like something versus something else. And you know, our guests coming up are going to be able to shed a lot of light on this. But throwing back to you, Curtis, if you could figure out the formula, if you could say you do this, then this, then this, then this, and suddenly people will like it, do you think that's a concrete solution, or do you think doing it enough times actually changes the formula itself? In other words, if I know that if I create a video that has cats and guns and explosions and pandas, that suddenly people will like it, could every video on the internet all of a sudden be about cats and pandas and guns and explosions, or would there would it reach a saturation point that would change the formula itself?
Well, first of all, I think if I could figure out a formula for doing that, then right now Warren Buffett would be bidding on having lunch with me rather than a bunch of people trying to bid to have lunch with him. I really do think, though, that it's the sort of thing where if it were a formula that's as simplistic as the one that you put out there, obviously the culture would pretty quickly route around it. What we do know, though, is that in a world of quickly developing and dissolving tribes, these memes are things around which a temporary tribe can coalesce. And let's just think of a couple of fairly silly ones. Remember just a few months ago when you could not turn around without seeing someone somewhere dancing Gangnam Style. And then much more recently, and for a much shorter period of time, people were Harlem shaking themselves all over the internet. What is it that makes people willingly join that kind of temporary, very dynamic tribe? And it's those keys. What are the justifications? What are the rewards? What do you get out of it when you participate? Those are the sorts of things that all of these various social scientists that they're bringing together are going to try to figure out. And to be honest, it's something that those of us who have been involved in media, especially online media, have been trying to figure out for at least 20 years.
Curtis, my friend, I think you've just had a moment of brilliance. It is the temporary tribe. You've just described the internet. It's a temporary tribe that moves from place to place to place, that has a membership that is constantly in flux. Ladies and gentlemen, we are the temporary tribe generation. Now, we're going to talk more about that temporary tribe. We're going to be bringing in our super secret guests who are experts in determining, well, let's call it the temperature of the temporary tribe. But before we go there, I want to take a moment to talk about our first sponsor. The first sponsor of the Twilight Riot, one of our very first, and so I'm always happy to welcome back Ring Central. That's right. When we built this studio, this beautiful studio, this monument to new media socialization, we decided that we wanted to do as much as possible in the cloud, because we tell people to go in the cloud. We tell people to put their information, to put their services away from their physical premise, and so we wanted to do the same thing ourselves. That means that our producers do all of their scheduling online. We do all our email in the cloud. We do our calendar on Google because we believe in the promise of a off-premise cloud-based service. So when Russell, our IT guy, came to us and told us that we could have a PBX system located in the cloud, well, it was a no-brainer. We love Ring Central. There are zero startup costs. There's no PBX hardware to install or maintain. Ring Central allows us to easily customize all of our call handling. Our producers get their voicemail and their emails, and we can even get all of our fax messages right on our smartphones. And now they have a new feature. It's called the RingCentral app for Salesforce.com. You can integrate all of your phone calls with your CRM system seamlessly. You create new records for contacts and leads and create real-time call notes while you're on the call. It really makes your CRM more productive, and it's easy to use. Now, RingCentral offers all-inclusive pricing as low as $20 per month per user. You can start right now with a 30-day risk-free trial, and they have a special offer for my listeners. When you buy one desk phone, you get a second phone free, up to 20 phones. So call this number, designated for my listeners, 800-543-9980. That's 800-543-9980. One more time, just in case the NSA didn't catch it the first two times, 800-543-9980. Or you can go to ringcentral.com and use our promo code TWIT. That's ringcentral.com, promo code TWIT, and we thank RingCentral for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Let's get to the meat of the episode. We've brought in two special guests. First of all, I'd like to introduce Mr. Adam Creeger, the AKQA Director of Product Development. Adam, thank you very much for coming into the studio. Can you describe to us really quickly, what is your vision of AKQA? What do you do?
What I do, I work with brands to help them solve their difficult technology problems from a consumer perspective, mainly.
I like it. Okay, it's a little cryptic, but I think that lends to the mystique, the mysteriousness of your business. And to our second guest, Mr. Jeff Titus, who is the Director of Tech Strategy and Engineering at AKQA. Welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your experience, and what brings you to the show.
Sure. Well, at AKQA, to add on to what Adam was saying, he handles things on the consumer side. I tend to work with corporations to help them integrate enterprise concepts and businesses and bring that into marketing perspective. My background, I've worked on the internet from the very early days. My brother actually was the one who drew the little Mozilla green dragon for Netscape.
Hey, all right.
And Dave Titus. And so back since then, I've been building sites and ended up working sort of on the back end, building out applications and so on. And here I am today, magically.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to have you on. I met you for the first time at Google I/O. I stopped by your booth and talked to your team, and they had a very interesting outlook on basically everything: the internet, marketing, social media, how you get the message about your product and your services out. And that's why I wanted you on the show, because, well, here on Twite, we tend to be hardware-centric. We tend to like building out networks. We like talking about technical details. But one of the things that we sometimes shun, and we shouldn't, is, well, the marketing and the development aspect of what goes into the products and services that we put out there. And so I thought you should come on, AKQA should be a guest, and we should talk about what it takes to make a hit in today's digital age. Now let's talk about this. Let's bring it out of the cloud a little bit, off the ivory tower. Jeff, explain to me, a customer comes to you, they say, hey, we've got X. X could be anything. It could be a new hardware project. It could be a new software in development. And they say, we need help turning this into a hit. What does AKQA do to make that happen?
Well, first of all, we have a pretty unique combination of creatives and technologists at AKQA, combined with pretty business savvy people. And we try to work with the customers to understand their business model very carefully. Their customer base, we do everything from field studies to working inside their corporations to understand what they're trying to sell and how they're trying to position their brand. And the creatives and the technologists get together and come up with ways to put in the field the ideas that we have and test them out. So a lot of the things that we've come up with have been small little campaigns that roll out a specific aspect of their business, a product, and try to highlight it, whereas others have been much larger, brand level initiatives trying to highlight what that company does well. And the technology side of this thing is really what's unique about the agency, because we essentially try to work, as I said, with creatives up front, coming up with and ideating, brainstorming on how we're going to solve some problems. And back to what was said earlier from Curtis, at least in my experience, the technologist getting involved early really helps bring forward ideas that come from another angle that actually identify things for people, I don't know, that may look at a different perspective than you might find from a typical agency. So companies come to us to do a very studied approach. They come to us for very smart and well-performing solutions. And we spend a lot of time working not to reinvent the wheel every time, and certainly not to take a cookie cutter approach either. We really try to look at that business and stay focused on what's right for that business, that moment, that brand.
I like that. Adam, let me go over to you. I want to jump back really quickly into the last Enterprise Bite that we did. Curtis and I were talking about Google and the engagement project and the temporary tribe. It sounds to me that that's a lot of the work that you do at AKQA. You try to read the bones. You try to look in the sand and figure out where things are going and how you should be positioning your product, how you should be positioning your company in order to make the biggest splash. What do you think is the number one most vital step about figuring out the meme, figuring out the viral, figuring out the next thing that you should be doing to promote your product or service?
I think it's spending time with your target audience. You can't just hang out on the periphery and then come up with a killer idea. You have to really get in there, figure out what people are doing. There are a whole team of people at AKQA whose job it is to truly understand what various parts of society are doing, whether it be the youth movement or the affluent 30-year-old professionals. And these guys, it's not like this is something they do as their day job. Like, this is what they live and breathe. Some of these guys, they get paid to be on Reddit, they get paid to be on Facebook, YouTube all day, because they have to understand this stuff.
Right. Curtis, I want to throw it over to you. Well, actually, no. We're going to come back to Curtis in just a bit because I want to save his insight for a little bit later. Let me go to you, Jeff. When we talk about traditional advertising, we typically are speaking of television and radio and print, newspaper, magazine. And now we've moved into a digital age. And I remember at the very beginning of this digital age, when we first started creating websites, everyone thought it just meant taking what you did in traditional advertising, traditional media, and putting it online. We have figured out since then that that's absolutely bonkers. You don't do that. You wouldn't just take your newspaper, put it into a PDF, and drop it on the internet and expect people to come visit. So what has changed about engagement, or about the style of presenting, or about the window in which you can grab audience? What has changed from traditional advertising to what I would call new media advertising?
Well, clearly it's really about the conversation that you can have now. It's data. We can get data back and feedback from those that are actually taking part in an experience or that are consuming what we're putting out. So a company can have a message, they can put it out to their audience, and rather than just constantly putting out dogma and not knowing what's coming back or how it might have been reacted to, even in real time with real-time recommendation engines and that sort of thing, we can get data back from those who are actually consuming this and make adjustments. So I think that's the biggest thing that's changed, is that now it's not just a two-way conversation, but actually in some ways a one-to-one conversation, very personalized, very focused, and with the right feedback and the right adjustments, you can actually tune things to make it very effective for a business. And that's the biggest change, I think, from those other mediums that you talked about.
Right. Curtis, let me throw over to you. Listening to them talking about AKQA, talking about listening to your audience, listening to engagement, listening to the different movements in social media, it sounds very much like I hear the job description for self-proclaimed social media experts. We've seen the rise of the social media expert, the person with his or her ear to the ground. How is that accepted by the enterprise? Does the enterprise see that as a necessary part of engagement now, or is it still a little bit of black magic? We keep them as a consultant and we occasionally listen to what they have to say.
Well, I think there are still some enterprises who do treat it as black magic, but you're seeing a growing number who recognize that this is, in fact, how the enterprise tells its story today. And in a very real way, that's a key difference. The enterprise sees the process as one of telling a story and getting a feedback from their customer, allowing the customer to participate in that story. We really are moving into some very new directions here. And I think one of the key things that's happening is that where only a few years ago, the technology side was seen as purely a set of people who were gifted at implementing the strategies that the marketing and advertising geniuses came up with. Today, the marketing people are looking to the technologist for not only ways to tell a story, but ways to shape that story in order to get the engagement with the audience. That key word, engagement, is one that not only enterprises, but publications and all sorts of other organizations are looking for. I think if we look back on this decade, engagement is going to be one of those words that really defines what's going on in business and even in wider spheres.
Adam, I want to talk to you about that because engagement is something that you do hear constantly. Thank you very much, Curtis, for bringing that up. And another thing that Curtis mentioned is this idea of storyteller, that in today's generation, with the engagement that we're allowed by the technology that we use, you have to be a storyteller. If you want to sell something, if you want people to buy into something, you have to be able to tell them the narrative of why it's a good thing. I think Apple is absolutely great at this. They're experts. They know how to tell a story. They know how to give you the narrative of why you want to be a part of their ecosystems, of why you want to buy their products, of why you want to be a supporter of the Apple idea. How much of this storytelling narrative do you personally use when you're trying to build up that engagement?
Well, I think it's interesting. The concept of telling a story, I think, is anything new to advertising. If you go back several decades, I think great advertisers have always tried to tell a good story. I think what we've seen over the last few years it's now more of a choose-your-own-adventure than a story that's like dictated to the consumer. Brands have to be aware that consumers and their customers may well try and change the story that they're trying to tell, and brands have to roll with that. And I think it's all about choosing the right story. You choose a message and a story that's simple enough and just is a simple truth, then it can pretty much roll with anything that the general public may throw at it and may change about that story. I think when brands are learning that when you try and tell such an intricate story, that it's easy for it to be just proven false.
Yeah, to be lost.
Yeah,
lost.
And I think that's what Apple have done really well. They tell a simple truth. Everything Apple does is simplicity.
Jeff, let me throw that over to you. How do you keep your story simplistic? I want to phrase this in something. I'm going to throw a curveball at you. Using the tools that we have, and the tools that we have as technologists are actually pretty limited. You know, you've got tools in social communication. You have tools in your e-commerce solutions. You have tools in your infrastructure. How do you use that to both tell a story and keep it simple? You know, as Adam was alluding to, how do you get people interested without bombarding them with all this stuff that they don't need?
Well, you know, it does come down to making sure that you have available simple avenues for people to interact with experiences or messaging. I think, you know, what we've seen is that we can make a lot of options available, but we have to make sure that people have a simple channel to go through to get to those end messages. And when they have something to say, they have a simple interface to use. I think in the earlier segment, you were touching on some really interesting themes around what is it that makes things popular. How do we know? How do we tell businesses what makes them popular? And I think, in my experience at least, there were situations where we created the most simplistic interface to actually take part in something. For instance, one of the early things in 2006, just click, upload your picture and attach it to a dancing character on the screen. Because there was nothing in the way of people taking part of that, they did it over and over again and shared it out with another click. It was very simple. So keeping things simple is important. The tools, it's really about availability. You have to make sure things load quickly. You have to make sure that you have the right sort of server infrastructure in place, that it's available all the time to all devices, using things like responsive grid, using things like virtualization to scale when you've got lots of traffic. So there's lots of tools behind the scenes that make things available and performant so that they're very simple to use and there's no frustration in the middle of what you're trying to get to.
All right, Adam, Jeff, I want to bring us all the way down to the ground. If my brand new TD, Cranky Hippo, can bring up the video of the blimp, I want to bring up something that AKQA did for Google at Google I/O. Here's a video of a blimp that you designed. You actually created. You didn't buy this anywhere. using, what was it, like 70 pounds of helium. I can't remember the figures of it. Used a lot of helium to create this blimp with a camera that you could guide from the ground. Now, the wonderful thing about this was you know, we've seen blimps, we've seen cameras floating in the air before, but people were just mesmerized by this device floating around the Moscone Center. What made you go with this approach? When you're trying to promote Google, which is a big company, what made you build a blimp with a camera hanging off the bottom? And, you know, what makes this a usable approach over something else?
Well, that's a great question. I think what made us go this approach? Part of the conversation with Google Plus was all about the launch of their new Photos product. So it's obviously, right, how do we go about taking photos in an interesting way? That's one thing. And obviously, you can then, have a group of creative people in a room. Someone is going to say, hey, let's just put a camera on a blimp. And then you get to, how do we get people involved with that? It's like, why don't we make it so that people can control the camera themselves? And actually, the first thing we talked about was, how do we make it so that people control the blimp? And we thought that would not be a good idea, so we settled on controlling the camera. And it's really just about thinking about the space it's going to be used in. We knew a blimp, or even a fleet of blimps, because there were more than one, would really dominate the airspace at Google I/O. So for something that's relatively quite small, there's a lot of impact, which is the marketer's dream.
Now, Jeff, you actually had some work in the blimp project, right? You were actually helping to design it, to program it. Tell me, what goes into the creation of a product like that, whose sole purpose is to bring up well, exposure for another product? I mean, even though the blimp itself, I thought the blimp was absolutely cool, and I actually got to play with the interface, and I thought, I can't believe you guys did this with, it was like a Raspberry Pi, right? That's what was controlling it. A Raspberry Pi, a blimp with some logos spray painted on it, and a camera hanging from the bottom. And I thought this is the best of hacker culture, just creating something that was really, really cool and then releasing it and seeing what happened. But why would you go with that? What makes that sticky versus some other avenue of exposing your product?
You know, it was also part of the experience on site. But back to something you just said, I actually wasn't involved directly in the development. A developer at AKQA named Chris Miller, he's the one that really owned the project. And he made some great, we trust our guys to make great selections about the technologies they'll use. But the experience itself, why is it sticky, why we're using those particular items to create the blimp, something that we thought was important. When you create something from the ground up, you can control a lot of how it's going to function, and you can hopefully add on a lot of elements that will delight, surprise people along the way. One of the things on the ground there that was really great was picking remote control, simple remote control mechanism to actually move the blimp around. Some of our guys got so good at it that they were floating the blimp up the escalator right next to people's heads right behind them, and it got a lot of notice at the convention. So. That was one of the reasons I think that you really want to build it from the ground up, is so that you have that kind of control. The other side of it is, of course, you know, people accessing from the community, going through the types of typical services you might have to access things. You can't predict everything unless you understand it end to end. So it makes it much more predictable how something's going to function when you build it from the ground up.
You actually brought up a great point that's going to lead into the next segment, and that is, what can enterprise take from, I'm going to call it the startup mentality, the idea of having a small team of very experienced people, letting them do their job, giving them a mission and saying, okay, we trust you to use your skills, your experience, your know-how to create something that will solve this problem, and then getting out of the way. I think that's something we don't talk about enough. We're going to get to that and to more insight from Curtis Franklin, but first I want to take some time to talk about the second sponsor of the Twiat Riot. And of course, that's TechServe. Now, we here at Twiat are all about the enterprise. Heck, it's in our name. We like the enterprise. We dream about the enterprise. But we also acknowledge that we don't do a great job of including Apple products in our enterprise rundown. And you know what? They are such a big part of what we use today. That's why I'm really happy that TechServe is part of our Twiat Riot. Now, as New York's premier authorized Apple reseller and technology provider, TechServe serves creative professionals at all levels, from individual customers to Fortune 100 companies. TechServe assists businesses of all sizes to deploy Apple Avid, and Adobe solutions throughout the U.S. Whether you're already committed to iPads or just getting started, from sales to support, process to practice, TechServe can help. Some amazing technology solutions are being deployed on iPads right now. If you've been to the Delta terminals on LaGuardia, Toronto, or Minneapolis, you may have noticed that nearly every seat in the terminal is equipped with an iPad. Travelers can now sit anywhere in the terminal and receive real-time flight updates on the iPad or use them to order food, play games, browse the internet, and check email while they're waiting. Over 1.5 million visitors use these iPads in Delta's terminal in just this past year. The result has been a double-digit increase in food and beverage revenue and the highest customer satisfaction scores in all participating airports. OTG Management is the hospitality company behind Delta's terminals. They've turned to TechServe to provide, configure, and deliver the world's largest deployment of iPads, a number that just keeps growing as they add new terminals. And TechServe was the natural place to turn. They sell, support, personalize, configure, and manage massive iPad projects. From the Delta terminals to a school with 700 chef instructors to an operation that delivered personally configured iPads to 3,000 plus cable technicians. TechServe is able to do full lifecycle management for all your technology needs by providing the devices that you need, getting them up and running, teaching you and your staff how to effectively use them, and maintaining them so that they're working efficiently. TechServe also provides ongoing support so that if your enterprise has a problem, help is just a phone call away. If you're considering adding iPads to your business, why not ensure the project's success with the world's most experienced partner? Now here's what we want you to do. If your business is considering integrating iOS technology at your workplace, then contact TechServe today and receive a complimentary iPad deployment assessment. Visit techserve.com/Twyett, and TechServe will assess your current or future iPad needs and give you advice on how to make it a success. That's techserve.com/Twyett. And we thank TechServe for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Let's get right back to it. We're talking all about how to expose your enterprise, expose your products and services, but doing it in a, well, I'm going to call it the startup way. Let me go back to you, Adam. What do you think enterprise can learn from the startup culture? Because it sounds to me like AKQA really does live in that startup world.
Yep, we live at the crux of the enterprise world and the startup world. Physically located in downtown San Francisco, startups are all around us. Anytime I ever see a screenshot of a map on any kind of new apps, on any new app, literally 9 times out of 10, the screenshot is of the street next to us. It's just the way it is. So you would have to be living under a rock not to be influenced by that. And I think there are a great many ways that, as an enterprise, you can be influenced by that. And I think the first and foremost way is the sort of the lean startup craze that's been sort of ripping through Silicon Valley and beyond for the last couple of years. I think it's time that someone wrote a book called The Lean Enterprise and showed them really kind of practices they can adopt from startups to increase their agility and really just increase the traction of their products.
Curtis, let me go over to you. We've heard this a lot. Essentially, every startup that has made it big in the Silicon Valley, we've heard this narrative of it starts off as a fun, quirky place to live, and it moves fast. They can pivot on a dime. They can get products out, not really worrying about whether or not they're going to succeed or fail, but just trying to do something amazing. And then the enterprise matures, and the quirkiness goes away, and the fun becomes more regimented than spontaneous, and they lose their startup feel. They lose the startup culture. That's the thing that AKQA is trying to capture. Why do you think that is? Why is that an inevitable part of growing a business?
Well, to a great extent, it's all about the money. When you're a startup, you don't have any. You don't have that much to lose. Frankly, for most startups, if they do have money, it belongs to someone else, and it's always a lot more fun playing with somebody else's money. You need to be trying to reach the top, doing something to strive for greatness, strive for something unique, and that's easy when you're starting. At some point, when you succeed, all of a sudden, the founders, the managers, someone in there decides that they've hit a magic point, and that magic point is different for every company, at which they say, my God, we're making a lot of money. We'd better not mess this up. That's the point at which normally a number of things happen. Policies and procedures start being put into place. Professional managers are hired. And to use a sports analogy, they start managing with a goal of not losing rather than managing with a goal of winning. That's the point at which the culture changes. And that's the point, if you want to think of the startup as something special, when the magic is shown to the door.
I like that. Adam and Jeff, I'm going to address this question to the two of you. Living in the crux of the startup and the enterprise as you do you see that? I mean, is it all about the money? Is it more difficult to pivot and make those quick decisions that you see all the time in startups that sort of define what a startup is as it moves into the enterprise because of the money?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I see that's an opportunity for AKQA and others like us when we come in and speak to enterprise, because the enterprise it's a big wheel that turns very slowly. They can't always move quickly on initiatives, but they'll bring an agency like us in to help them move quickly. And because we have that startup approach to things, that makes it faster in a project sense to like do a pilot program or do something very quickly that may produce results and give them some understanding of how it might go. Because we're near a lot of the startups, we also have access to friends and colleagues that don't necessarily work directly with us, but we have that atmosphere around us all the time and we feel it. We bring a lot of the techniques and the tools into the enterprise with us when we go and make recommendations. So I think that's what you see, and I think that's a very valuable thing to bring to an enterprise that way, and it's actually low cost that way for them as well.
All right. I think we've danced around the topic long enough. We understand your philosophy. We understand what AKQA is trying to do. Now let's actually show it. Can either of you give me an example of a company, and you don't have to name the company, that has come to you, asked for help with a project, asked for help with a release, asked for help with development, and then can you explain the solutions that you came up with to give them what they wanted?
Yeah, sure. I think I can think of two, one of which I was closely involved with. And it's probably, I think we were involved about 2-3 years ago. And the other, Jeff, has been very closely involved with and is still closely involved with. So I guess I'll start. I'm going to bring up, in just a couple of seconds, I'll bring up the iPad I have here. Right now it's just a lock screen. So,
and these will be slides of projects that you were actually working on.
This is, just to give, in case anyone, viewers wondering, I have a software engineering background. I'm much more of a tech guy, really, than a marketing guy. But I just love marketing. I love the interactions with the different kinds of people it brings. So my role on this project was all about, was basically a technical architect. I helped build the infrastructure, and it's a great one because this is a company called Virtuel. It was a subsidiary of a large health insurance company in Minneapolis or Minnesota called Health Partners. And they came to us with the basic idea: we want to treat people online. But they said, with your expertise, we think you're the perfect partner to help us do it. They wanted to treat it like a startup, but it doesn't matter whether you're a startup or an enterprise. When it comes to healthcare, there are certain regulations, certain rules that you cannot bend. So it was the perfect mix of both building something in an agile way, but yet adhering to some pretty tough regulations. And the idea of the site is that you go online, you give them some information about any kind of sickness you're having, and if you sort of flick through the photos, you'll see that it asks you basic questions, and then asks you about your medical situation generally, and then it's the usual registration process. But they also ask you, hey, what's your favorite pharmacy? What pharmacy do you like? And then they give you some kind of a treatment plan. That treatment plan may or may not include prescription drugs. If it does, they're sent straight to your pharmacy. You can go pick them up. It cost $40 when it launched, about $115 on average cheaper than an average office visit. And I think it was one of the, for me, up until that point, one of the best things I'd ever worked on, because we not only got to help everyday people save money and get better healthcare for themselves and their kids, but we also got to help bootstrap a company that was running. So I got to visit them a few months later, and there were 20 employees, registered nurses, software engineers, other staff, and it was a great feeling.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you this. Looking at your slides there and looking at the solution that you built out for them, it would seem to me that the technologist can pretty easily figure out the back end. We know we wanted to go from here to here to here to here, but what does AKQA add to the process? What do you, as a consultant, come to them and say, you're doing this wrong, or this is a incorrect preconceived notion, and we're going to help you fix this? In other words, I think another way of asking this question is, what are the tools that are most often misused? What are the design choices that often take companies down the wrong path? What are the decisions that you think are often made in ignorance?
So I think the design decisions that are most often made in ignorance or done, wrong is it's all about simplicity. So something Jeff said earlier, AKQA is exceptional at combining technical excellence with creative brilliance. We don't have a process that involves like a bunch of creatives sitting in a room, so designers or copywriters or any of those folks, and then they come up with an idea and then they hand off an idea to a technologist who then goes away and builds it. Everyone sits in the same room and brainstorms on the same ideas, and instead of technologists restricting creative ideas, we actually inspire them. When it comes to the internet, software engineers probably spend more time on the web than anyone else. So they know what's going on, and they can really help inspire creatives. So when it comes to, I think if you flip to the slide I have up right now, this is part of the interview, and there's a couple of elements here that are really crucial. One is we're asking one question, right? There's nothing else on the screen. It's just the question and the answer. That's it. There's an indication of the number of questions you've been through. We don't try and guess how many questions there are to come, because we don't know, because it depends on your answers. And the other thing, if you look at the bottom there, you'll see the green ball. That is actually called Fred. And we had the idea of adding this animated piece to the experience that kind of felt a little bit lifelike, but still didn't try and be a human, because ultimately this is a sort of a website taking your answers here. But we added that, and it tested really well. People loved it, so we kept it in. And I think if a technology company would have come up with this solution, it would have been an ugly list of questions with no human elements. It would have felt very dry. The priority would have been HIPAA compliance, but the user experience would have been a poor second or third place. Whereas with us, HIPAA compliance was a priority, but on equal footing was the user.
I want to break out a little bit and go back to you, Curtis. What he's talking about, what Adam is describing, is sort of the new way to design interfaces, the new way to design products that, again, are really simple, that tell a very simple story, that pull you in with a good design and then get the information that it needs to get. Why is that so difficult for enterprise? I mean, if we look at pretty much any enterprise solution, it doesn't follow any of those lessons. Most of the tools that we use are the exact opposite. They bombard you with information. They ask all the questions, only some of which they'll actually use in the final outcome. And they do so in a design that could, at best, be considered industrial retro. Why is it so difficult for enterprise to get the lessons of new media?
I think that there are a couple of things involved. One of them is what we'll call design by or purchase by checkbox. That's where someone is putting together a list of things that the product needs to have or do. They pass that around or go interview people in every department or piece of the organization that might use it, put together a huge list, and from that they construct a checklist. And then when they put together the interface, someone's going to go through it with this list of checkboxes and make sure that everything that everyone wanted is represented in the interface. That almost guarantees a huge cluttered monstrosity of an interface. The other thing is similar, and I call it the features by the pound syndrome. That says if we're going to pay a lot of money for this, whether it be internal resources being spent or an external consultant, we want to make sure we're getting our money's worth. How do we make sure we're getting our money's worth? We look at just how many features they've crammed into that one screen. The more you can get features by the pound, the better you feel about writing that big check. Now, both of these are actually the enemy of great design and superb functionality, but they are terribly ingrained in the purchasing mindset of many, many organizations.
I like that. And actually, one of the things that I like that you brought up is the fact that we decide things by check. Check box and by check. We buy something, we say, okay, this is the next great solution. That's the old way of making something. We would create a site, we would create a product, we would create an interface and say, okay, this is the thing that we're going to stick with until the next product cycle, which could be a year, 2 years, 3 years down the line. I want to throw over to you, Jeff, because I understand that one of your specialties is this idea of continuous delivery. It's something that we're seeing more and more. It's something that's becoming more important, and it's something that's just breaking into enterprise. First of all, for the folks playing at home, can you explain to them what is continuous delivery?
Sure. So everyone's heard of continuous integration, continuous deployments. Continuous delivery is building out a pipeline that goes from development all the way through to production, where the philosophy always fits continuous improvement, and it also fits a continuous update through automated testing and a predictable outcome. So the deployment of artifacts and content all the way up through the production environments, that is something that can be predicted from the beginning in a development workspace. And there are very specific principles you can follow. There's a great book that was written by a gentleman who works for ThoughtWorks. And a few others have been big proponents of this over the years now. And it really is all about making sure that people are working in a unified way and automating any testing processes around it to basically work together as a team from one end to the other. Now, one of the big things that's different, I think, for a developer is that you have a responsibility all the way up through production to work on your code base and resolve any issues, but do so as part of a team. So for instance, if you deploy a change and there's a break that happens up in the QA server or even up just before it's going into production, and that's a blocking breakage based on your code that you've introduced, the whole team can stop the line then and resolve that. So it's also, there's some Scrum and Agile methodologies around it as well. It's a way of organizing and distributing your workflow in a way that basically keeps a pipeline of work going straight up through to production and doing so very quickly, and very regularly, so that things are constantly being changed, but in a predictable fashion.
I like that. So versus the old model, which is create something and it's static until the next time we create it, this is constant improvement. As you deliver, figure out what's working, what's not working, what interface choices did we make that are leading to positive experiences, and what's leading to negative. But it seems that that's something that we should have started with. Why is this idea of continuous delivery so new, so difficult to implement?
Well, it's a philosophy, but it's also about tools, and it's also about how you implement things in process. So you can see that it's not just one thing or the other, it's actually the entire ecosystem and how you build out a site or an application. For instance, a lot of people know Agile. There's a lot of proponents of ideal ways of doing Agile. For me, I don't know what pure Agile actually means. I do know that teams work in an Agile fashion to realize a particular goal or some objectives. But bringing the good things from an Agile process in, stand-ups, retrospectives, doing things where you pair people up and actually contribute to the code base in a way where people are learning and growing together as a team, that's a really important part of this. Add into that tools like a virtualized deployment pipeline where the developers are writing tests, and those tests, when you get into an integration environment, you're propagating your change. Once it gets up into integration, those automated tests are constantly being added in and improved so that you're not taking as many manual steps. You're looking for opportunities to constantly streamline and make things more efficient. And then once things are up into a place where you might contribute content or a place where you're doing typical manual QA steps, that's all part of the process as well, and we're all learning from it as we go. It's not one thing or the other, and that's why it gets to be complex.
Curtis, let me throw this over to you for a second, because believe it or not, we've heard this sort of continuous delivery language from Microsoft, which is, I think, one of the last companies we think would do this. Microsoft is known for creating a new release of something every 2-3 years, whatever it might be. But recently they've talked about going from a delivery cycle of months and years to a delivery cycle of days and weeks. This is enabled by their new push into something like Office 365 and cloud-based services, which allow them to push updates continuously to respond to customer remarks and customer feedback on the products and then improve them. Is this a sign of things to come? I mean, is continuous delivery going to be a de facto standard? Is it going to be the cost of playing?
I think it depends a little bit on precisely what market you're playing in, but at the point that it touches most people in the enterprise, I think it is going to become something of a much more common model. As you say, Microsoft has shortened their release cycle, and finally, with the release of Office 365, they've taken it to a more or less continuous develop, release, learn, redevelop, re-release cycle. That's pretty easy to do when you're talking about something like Office productivity tools. It becomes a little more complex when you start looking at some of the back-end tools because of all the various dependencies. There, I think that we'll see the release cycle become more frequent, but you still are going to have the sandboxing testing cycle before things are just rolled out. If you step a little bit further into the system, when you look at things like firmware for appliances, the underlying code that makes things run in a position such that an update would require taking the hardware down, I think we're going to see, once again, those cycles shortening, but never really going into that continuous update. For most consumers and most enterprise users of web-facing or dedicated personal productivity and office productivity apps, though, the continuous update cycle is really here to stay.
I like it. Open question to our panelists again, and that is, we've been talking a lot about what the creative process can add to the technologist's view of products and services. I want to switch that around. What do you think it is that technologists can offer to the creative process? So in other words, as we are looking at this continuous delivery, at this continuous improvement of whatever our product might be, what can someone who is more like me, kind of a techie person, give to the people who are driving the creative decisions of the product?
Practicality is one of the main things, but without saying no. So if you get involved in that creative process and your objective is to move it along and to come to a conclusion with the creatives or actually add to it, rather than finding out where the blockages are or where the things are that are challenging, looking for ways to actually move people in the right direction to get to an answer. So it's, as a technologist, sometimes we have to go in and suspend our disbelief when we have a new concept that hasn't been tried yet and be willing to be the expert in the room to help guide people in the right direction without shutting them down. But you actually have a different way of looking at things from a practical standpoint as a technologist that others may not, and that changes the way you actually come to a conclusion or the input that you put into a discussion.
I like that. Adam, what do you think? As a technologist, what can I give to the people who are working on the creative side of my development team?
Yes, I think as a technologist, you have the tools to do. When it comes to writing software and designing software, some creatives, you know, the best creatives are able to certainly write HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And that's awesome because they really get to play around and understand the interactive nature of what they're thinking about. But sometimes they have a whole bunch of questions like, yeah, but would it be possible to integrate with this service or do this thing? Or wouldn't it be amazing if there's something that could automatically guess this? And a technologist can come to the table and say, well, you know what? Google has a prediction API for that. Or why don't we just spin up a few servers here and there and figure this out? So I think they can really move things along and inspire the creatives even more, which acts as a cycle because then the creatives then turn around and inspire the technologist.
I like that, the eternal cycle. Now, we are going to come back to wrap up, to talk about what AKQA has envisioned for the future of marketing and for product releases in the next 3 to 5 years. But before that, I do want to talk about the last sponsor of our Twiet Riot, and of course, that's MailRoute. Anyone who's watched the Twit Network knows that MailRoute is a long-term supporter. They've been here forever, and you know what? They understand what we're trying to do, so we want you to understand what they're trying to do. Do you need a migration plan away from Postini or Forefront? Then please check out MailRoute. MailRoute is a hosted email filtering service in the cloud for businesses of any size. There's no easier way to filter your email. You don't need any hardware or software. You just point your email to MailRoute, they filter it, and deliver the clean email to your email server. MailRoute directly reduces your cost by eliminating 90% or more of your server load, decreasing bandwidth use, and more. There are no upgrades or updates necessary. MailRoute service never becomes obsolete. Because MailRoute is in the cloud, it eliminates the need of having a dedicated server for spam filtering. And all that's necessary is to sign up with MailRoute and then make a change to your DNS MX records to start the flow of clean email. You don't even have to own or manage your own email server. As long as you have your own domain, MailRoute can filter your email and send it off to your server wherever it may be. Now, MailRoute's dashboard gives you direct control over every aspect of your service, from setting the sensitivity of the spam filter to adding domains or users and managing whitelists, blacklists, and end users can even manage their own settings, and administrators can control them all. MailRoute offers free customer support to accounts of all sizes, single users on up. Now, here's some interesting statistics. Over the last 12 months, we blocked over 235,000 spam messages for Tom Merritt. That was 99.7% of Tom's total mail volume. We also blocked nearly 600,000 messages for Leo in the last 12 months. That's over 12 million messages blocked by MailRoute for Leo since he first started using the service. MailRoute also has Store and Forward, one of my personal favorite features. It holds mail up to 15 days, no file limit if your server goes down, which means they are essentially your disaster recovery email service. Now, we want you to try it free. MailRoute will price match on Postini or Forefront contracts. So visit mailroute.net/signup.html and enter the promo code Enterprise6 to start your 15-day free trial. That's mailroute.net/signup.html, promo code Enterprise6. No credit card required for the free trial. And we thank MailRoute for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now let's finish back up. We're talking all about the philosophy of keeping the start-up mentality within the enterprise, of using it to drive the decisions that drive your products to market. This is, again, it's an underserved part of enterprise tech, because if all you're thinking about is the hardware or the software as delivered, you're never going to figure out how to make it better. So we're talking to Adam Creeger and Jeff Titus from AKQA about what we can expect to see in the next 3 to 5 years. I'm going to throw this to you first, Jeff. What do you think marketing and advertising will look like in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I can tell you that I think we've seen that data and recommendation engines and getting down to the personal aspects of consumer behavior is something that is taking hold now in the enterprise for sure. I think that's going to grow. We're creating things like what we would call the single view of the customer for enterprise. So starting in digital channels, we start to understand through DMPs and through other mechanisms to take data and look at how people are utilizing digital properties. And then we take that and expound on it within the business to other business units. And that single view of the customer, starting with one particular ID or one particular representation of that customer interest or what they do or what they're actually interacting with for the business, taking that down to the lower level, to the analog channels and so on, you'll see a lot more of that. People joke about putting PDFs up and attaching data to them and doing analytics on them, that sort of thing. But in the real world, we really do need tools because our real world is becoming more digitally attached as well. So through a retail sales process or some other such venue or some other such channel, there's going to be a lot more of that data available right there in real time so that when you're having a discussion with someone face-to-face, there's an advantage on both sides, not just the consumer and not just the sales side. There's an advantage on both sides to understand and enhance and enrich that conversation.
Jeff, we've had a request from the chat room for you to define what a DMP is.
DMP, digital marketing platform, data management platform, sorry, digital marketing. Data management platform, it's basically where when you have Comcast or you have any of these places you may be subscribed to, they sell an anonymous data about your usage. And that data is provided through, if you've ever been, a great example of this is you've been on a site and you've been looking at a product, and then you surf away from that, you go to Gmail or you go wherever else you go, and banners follow you where you're going. It's because there's a lot of information being carried across those channels, and it's not necessarily tied to your personal information. But DMPs go even one step further. They have information stored about your use that they purchased from these other companies, from your lifestyle interactions and products that you work with, and they take that and they aggregate it all together to try to create a profile of who you are. It's a little big brother. It's pretty scary. It's a reality. I mean, for those who are worried about this or want to block everything and wall themselves off, it's really not possible in today's age. It's just not there. So DMPs are just a part of that whole system.
I like that. I like the embracing of the inevitable. Adam, let me go over to you. Let me modify the question slightly so you're not answering the exact same question as Jeff. Looking at the next 3 to 5 years, what do you think are going to be the biggest mistakes that people make as they try to respond to this new age of advertising, of marketing, and of design?
I think I kind of touched on this earlier with the enterprises learning from startups, learning their agility. I think that there's a balance of when to release a product versus when to make it better. And I think that a lot of companies are going to get that very wrong over the next few years. There will be a lot of companies releasing products way too early, and the mistakes coming from that will prove to be very costly. And I'm sure 1 or 2 companies may well fail as a result of that.
That's pretty heavy. Curtis, I want to get your last nuggets of wisdom here. In talking about marketing and talking about enterprise design, let me be completely honest, we often shy away from the marketing side because we don't want to be contaminated by it. We see it as lesser than the hardware design and the people who actually design services that we're going to use. But what we're seeing more and more often is that if you don't consider design, if you don't consider how you market, if you don't consider how you're selling the narrative of your product, it's going to fail. It's that simple. It doesn't matter how great the product is. If you don't know how to tell people why they should use it or why it should become part of their process, you might as well not create it. What do you see in the next 3 to 5 years? Do you see enterprises embracing that? Do you see especially large enterprises realizing that they have to engage on a startup level? They have to move quicker. They have to be more nimble. They have to use expertise like that's found at AKQA in order to sell a narrative to a society, to a culture that they maybe don't really understand anymore.
Oh, I think we're already seeing the fact that they do understand these things. In recent weeks, I've had a chance to talk to people in charge of software development and in charge of product management at some of the larger industrial companies in the world. And what they are all saying is that they are now thinking about this story that the product tells, whether they use that language or not. That's the point that they're making. That's meaning a lot of different things and some new roles for those of us who traditionally, as you say, keep our feet firmly grounded in the technology. One of those things is that we have the obligation and we are being expected to play a greater role in the product design. People are asking not just, when can you make this happen, but how best can we make it happen? What do you think? The flip side of that is that we're being allowed to be part of the process much earlier, and our inputs are being valued. That's an entirely new role for the technologist, and frankly, it's an entirely new role for the marketing team, the working together, the greater, and I do hate this word, synergy between the technology, the anthropology, and the marketing goal of the organization. Put them all together, and I think that they're going to make for a much stronger and more compelling set of things and services that we offer to the customers, and frankly, that we might have available for our use as well.
Adam and Jeff, I'm going to give you the last word here. And also, Curtis, I should mention that when you said synergy, they both cringed. Our guests cringed and started laughing. So they're with you on this. Adam, Jeff, if I am running a startup, if I'm running a small business, if I am part of an enterprise, what would you want me to know? What are the nuggets of wisdom? I'm going to say the one thing, the one most important thing that I should carry with me as I look at my development cycle, as I look at my product releases, as I look at how I'm going to sell my product and services to the public?
I'll start. Your biggest advantage is time to market, so invest in that. If you want to try something out, you may be wrong, and you need to find that out quickly, so increase the feedback loop and get things up as quickly as possible. That means your investment needs to be in a fast development cycle with the right infrastructure, the right tools, and the right experts on staff to keep that running and keep things moving up to your production level exposure. That's probably the most important thing I would tell people. Make that investment and make sure you have a streamlined way of getting things out.
Adam, last words?
Yep, if you're in a startup, I would keep things simple, but always work towards a much bigger strategy. And take a leaf out of some bigger brands' books when it comes to how they create their brand. Look at companies like Uber, who have done the most amazing job of creating a world-class service and a world-class brand.
I love it. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much. I'm sorry we've used up another hour listening to the best dang enterprise podcast in the universe. That's right, I took a poll. 9 out of 10 priests agree that Twite is ranked on top. And that number 10, well, you just never really liked me. But I do want to give some time to my panelists to, well, tell us a little bit about what they're doing. Curtis, let's start with you. Over in Florida, I love the work that you do at Enterprise Efficiency. I love the fact that you just came back from Tech Ed. But tell me, what are you involved with? What should the Twite Right know about?
Well, I'm going to keep moving around. I'm going to be at the E2 conference in Boston. I'm going to be going out and talking to a lot of CIOs and enterprise developers through the summer. And we've also got a great summer's worth of E2 radio coming up. So to use a phrase that we have used a lot in this show, I'm going to be telling a lot of stories this summer. And I hope that some of the members of the Twite Riot will come along and listen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Always a pleasure to have you on, Curtis. Now let's go over to you, Adam. What do people need to know about you or AKQA? What do you want the Twite Riot to pay attention to?
Well, need to know about me. I'm a new father of an 8-week-old girl, so I think that's the major thing that's going on in my life. And I think my time at AKQA right now is spent working with Audi on a bunch of tools for their showrooms, which is pretty amazing. And also starting to work with a large national retailer on a very popular web product of theirs, which is going to be very exciting.
You have to speak in these sort of couch terms.
Every so often, yeah, we have to.
So I always ask about this because it could be a conflict of interest, but can you tell us anything that could get you fired?
Yes, I could, yeah.
Okay. All right, we'll leave it there. That's fine. That's fine. Let's go over to you, Jeff. Here's your 60-second plug. Anything you want to say, what do you want to say to us?
Sure. Well, just to say what Adam was talking about, I just finished a year working on the new AudiUSA.com site. It's a responsive grid. It's very performant. I love the work. I'm really proud of what we did. We've got a new configurator, a new way of highlighting that product. But I got to tell people, I'm a guitarist. I'm a musician. I've been doing this for a long time, and my mentor is Alex DeGrassi. You need to go look at my guitars because they're the only ones in the world. 24-string harp sympatar dedicated to Michael Hedges, and a beautiful new 18-string baritone harp sympatar with MIDI triggers and all kinds of interesting sympathetic strings and sharpening levers. So in that world, I hope you'll go over and listen to my music and check it out.
You were showing that to me in the prep. I got to say that that thing that you designed, that was built, it is beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. We're going to make sure that we get it in the show notes because it is a thing of beauty. In fact, let's get you back for the Maker Show because people need to know how you created that. I also want to thank you. That's right, you. The people who have sat here for the last hour listening to, again, to the best dang enterprise podcast in the universe, because without you, we don't have a show. And I thank you for coming back week after week to listen to us and letting us do what we love doing. And that is bringing you some of the coolest angles on enterprise tech. But did you know that you could have this podcast, right, that this show right now, the one that you're listening to or watching, you could have it delivered to your favorite device automatically each and every single week? That's right. Go to our show page right now at twit.tv/Twyat. Once you're there, you'll be able to find out all the ways that you can have the show automatically delivered to your iPad, your iPod, your iPhone, to your Android device, your phone or your tablet, heck, to your Zombie Zune. You can get everything because we love you. And we want to make sure that you can get the audio version, the high-definition video version, any version that you need to get the data that we want to give you. Also, did you know that we do this show live? That's right. Every Monday at noon, you can go to live.twit.tv and watch not just the show, but the pre and the post show. I got to tell you, talking about temporary tribes, that is the place to go because you get to see the sausage being made. You get to see how we set up, how we tear down, how we talk to our guests, how we talk to our co-host. It's all part of that temporary experience that is Twyat. Now, speaking of the temporary experience, we've also got a chat room. So if you watch live, you can drop into our chat room at irc.twit.tv and talk to some of the most informative members of our chat room, some of the most brilliant engineers, and yes, some of the biggest trolls. They'll give you a PhD in trollology, and I say that in a good way. Finally, did you know that you could follow me on Twitter? If you go to twitter.com/PadreSJ, you'll be able to find out what I'm doing each week on the show, and you'll be able to comment on previous shows or suggest topics for future shows. That's right. A lot of the show topics that we take straight from my Twitter account. So if you want to get involved, jump in and follow. Wait, did I say that was the final thing? No, it's not. It's not. You see, because we also have a YouTube page. If you right now you go to youtube.com/Twyat, you'll be able to subscribe to our podcast. Now, here's the bonus features. If you subscribe, you'll be able to get access to videos, not just the episodes, but videos that aren't seen on Twyat and all of our pre-recorded segments. That's the stuff my IT guy says. That's the data closet. That's pro tip and pro gear. All those little things that we like to put in the show to give you the knowledge about the gears, the tools, and the services that we use in the enterprise, you can get individually. This is one of the things that we do to say we love you. Finally, I want to thank everyone who makes this show possible. I want to thank Cyberdog in the chat room for helping to do our show notes, to thank Karsten Bondi for being our super producer, to thank Jason Howell for being our TD. In fact, let's talk to Jason right now. Jason, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing well, Padre. How are you?
You look a little different.
I'm feeling a little under the weather.
A little under the weather, yeah. Well, being under the weather, might you have a show that you do every week that's about some non-iOS hardware software solution?
Every Tuesdays at 5 o'clock, you can join me and Gina Trapani and Ron Richards, and we do a show all about this little guy right here.
All about that Android. Oh, well, you know, I hope you feel better because I got to tell you, you look horrible. You look absolutely horrible. Hopefully you get back to form. Finally, again, thanks to you for tuning in, to listening to all of our shenanigans. I'm Father Robert Balacer, and I'm reminding you, you want to know what's going on in the enterprise? Just keep Twyat.